All rise. Hear ye, hear ye. This honorable court is now in session. The Honorable Jed S. Rakoff presiding.
Please be seated. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're about to hear opening statements of counsel. I want to caution you that nothing the counsel says is evidence. The evidence will come to you only from the witnesses who will take the stand and from the exhibits that are received in evidence. But because the evidence will come in one witness at a time, one exhibit at a time, it may be useful for you to have a brief overview of what each side believes the evidence will show or fail to show, as the case may be. I want to remind you that it is the government's burden to establish proof beyond a reasonable doubt before the defendant can be convicted of anything. And for that reason, we begin with an opening statement from the government. Mr. Quinn.
Thank you, Your Honor. It was Friday night, around 11:45 p.m. on April 4th. And it started out like any other ordinary Friday night for Mr. Ahmed Elz. He was closing up his local convenience store and gas station, a family-run business. In fact, that very night, just like almost every other Friday night, his wife was helping out close up the family business in the back of the convenience store. And everything seemed just normal. And then, everything changed. 3 young men burst into the store. One of the young men starts wrestling with and grappling with the customer in the store to make sure that the customer doesn't escape. And the other 2 young men, they rush to the counter, face to face, eye to eye with Mr. Elz, yelling at him, screaming at him, telling him, me the money, give us the money, cursing at him. And of one of those 2 young men, the shorter of the 2 men, in his black hooded sweatshirt, he's pulling out his gun and he's pointing. He's pointing at Mr. Elz, face to face, as they're yelling and demanding the money. And then it went from bad to worse. Because as the one man with the gun, the defendant, Jimmy Moran, is holding his gun, pointing at Mr. Elz, probably hearing the commotion, Mrs. Elz comes from the back of the store. She comes out. His wife, Cherie. And as Cherie comes out from the back office, and as she approaches, trying to get the attention of the defendant and his friends, the defendant who's pointing his gun at her husband, suddenly the defendant switches. And he quickly aims at her, and he shoots her, hitting her square in the head. And as Mrs. Elz falls to the ground, the defendant and his 2 friends, they run out of the store, leaving behind Mr. Elz and his wife in a pool of her own blood, and leaving behind their lives, which have been changed forever. And for this, the defendant is charged with 3 crimes. First, armed robbery. Secondly, aggravated assault. And finally, attempted murder. And after you have seen all of this evidence, and after all of you have heard all of this evidence, I will come back and ask you to return the only verdicts that is consistent with the evidence in this case, which is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of all charges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we'll hear from counsel for the defendant.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Judge Rakoff, prosecution, and to the family of Jimmy Moran. Now, this is my opportunity to tell you about what I think the facts in this case are going to actually show. Not the theory of the case, but the facts of the case. And the facts of the case are pretty straightforward. Everything that happens here happens in a matter of less than 10 seconds. If you pay very close attention to the evidence, you'll see a rapid succession of events that end with the storekeeper's wife being shot. But the case is about tragedy in a life that was almost lost, but also tragedy involved with the participants in this case. Because in this trial, the issue for you to decide will be the issue of intent. Intent. That means what is the state of the mind of the young men as they entered the store? What was their state of mind as the gun was fired? There was an expectation that there was going to be cash there, an easy prey to go in, to startle the owner, to grab the money, and to run out. But as one great philosopher once talked about, there's something called the law of unintended consequences. And one of those unintended consequences you're going to find, something that they didn't expect, something that they didn't plan for, was that in the middle of trying to grab the money, a person came out of nowhere. And when that person showed up, in a split second, the young man with the gun turned in that direction and fired. The evidence will show not aimed, but fired impulsively. And you have to determine from the facts that's presented whether or not it was aimed and hit dead center, as was said, or was it an impulsive act done by a teenager, scared and maybe under the influence of alcohol and drugs. Now, in order for you to find attempted murder, you have to have the state of mind to cause death. And so you, the jurors, have to determine what was Jimmy Moran's state of mind with respect to that. Unfortunately, as jurors, you're not able to look into the mind of the participants, nor are you able to look into the minds of the three young men that went into the store. If you had that ability, you'd have some type of futuristic supernatural power. But in the absence of that, you are left with having to decide the facts as they're presented. And what I would suggest to you, that as you're observing those facts and you're reviewing the facts, we're here in the security and safety of Judge Rakoff's courtroom. But these facts unfolded themselves in a highly emotional, heightened frenzy. And everything took place, as I said before, the evidence will show, in less than 10 seconds. And so from this standpoint, you are going to have to decide what happened here. You're going to have to decide whether or not there was a plan to commit murder, a plan to assault, or whether or not these were unintended consequences of that act. Now, I'm going to ask you to pay close attention to the facts and the sequence of events, the sights and the sounds, and try to get a sense and feel for what was going on in those very brief moments. If you pay very close attention to the evidence, you look at the surveillance tapes, and you reserve judgment until you're instructed on the law, I am convinced that as jurors, at the end of the case, you'll come back with a verdict of not guilty with respect to attempted murder, robbery, and aggravated assault. Thank you very much, Your Honor.
Thanks very much. All right, Mr. Quinn, please call your first witness.
The government calls as its first witness Mr. Thomas Quinn.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I swear.
Please be seated.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Quinn, where were you on the night of April 4th around 11:30 p.m.?
I was in the gas station.
In the convenience store of the gas station?
Yeah.
And were you involved in a robbery that night?
Yes.
Now, are you testifying today because you have a plea agreement with the government?
Yes, I do.
And what's your understanding of that plea agreement, what it obligates you to do here in court today?
I'm supposed to tell the events as they truthfully happened.
All right, so let me take you then to the night of April 4th, that Thursday night. You said how many friends came in there with you?
2 friends.
And who are these 2 friends that went into the convenience store with you?
My friends Jimmy and Harry.
If you can, could you look around to the courtroom today, and do you see your friend Jimmy anywhere in here?
Yes, I do.
Okay, can you point him out for the members of the jury and describe where he is and what he's wearing?
He's at the front desk and he's wearing green.
Your Honor, may the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant, Jimmy Moran?
Yes, the record will so reflect.
Now, was there any talk as you and the defendant planned out the robbery with Harry to use a gun?
Jimmy had mentioned that he was going to bring a gun just in case.
And whose gun was that was brought to the robbery?
Jimmy had this gun with him. I don't know who it belonged to, but Jimmy was the one that brought it.
All right, now taking you to the neighborhood convenience store on that night, around 11:30 on April 4th, what did the three of you do?
We went into the convenience store. Me and Jimmy went straight up to the counter.
Where in relation to the clerk were you and Jimmy?
Me and Jimmy were right in front of the clerk. The counter was in between us.
And what happened at that point?
At that point, Jimmy pulled out the gun on him, and we both threatened him to give us the money or else.
And then what happened next?
Then a woman came from the back. I assume it was his wife. And then Jimmy turned and he fired the gun and he shot the woman.
No further questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you. Cross-examination.
Thank you very much, Ron. Mr. Quinn, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Now, you told us that this was a planned event. That is, the robbery of this convenience store, right?
Yes.
And so that means that you and other people in the gang got together, the boss and the followers, and planned what was going to happen, right?
Yes.
Now, you're over the age of 20, aren't you?
Yes.
Harry, over the age of 20, right?
Yes.
Jimmy, barely 18 on the day this event happens. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Now, you said to us that it was Jimmy's idea, not your idea, but Jimmy's idea to bring the gun, right?
Yes.
You said you had talked about doing the robbery, but there was no discussion or idea from you that you were going to get this money by way of a gun, right?
Yes.
Now, how was you going to get this money? How were you going to do this robbery? Tell the jurors, without a gun.
We were going to threaten him and yell at him, and we were going to give him the impression that we could do him physical harm.
You're standing in front of the clerk yelling, "Give us the money, give us the money," correct?
Yes.
All of a sudden, someone comes out of the room, right?
Yes.
Jimmy turns, the gun goes off, right?
Yes.
Never a part of the plan for that to happen. Am I right or wrong?
You're right. That was not part of the plan.
Now, we sit here today, you, meaning Tommy Quinn, the boss, you got a cooperation agreement so you could stay out of jail, right?
Yes.
And you plead guilty to crimes you never intended to commit, right?
Yes.
And Jimmy, the teenager, is sitting here on trial, right?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
All right. Thank you very much. You may step down. Please call your next witness.
The government calls as its next witness Mr. Ahmed Elz. Mr. Elz, what is it that you do for a living?
I run a convenience store and a gas station.
Did your wife used to help you with that business?
Yes, we both manage it.
Now, in your convenience store, do you have any surveillance cameras?
We have 4 cameras.
What I'm going to do for you right now is play Exhibit A, which is the video footage you testified about. You can look at the monitor in front of you. It's also being played on the monitors for the jurors here. What's happening at this moment?
So as you can see, I was talking to my wife. She was sitting in the office. I was counting some coins, and 3 young men stormed in. 2 of them came towards me, and one of them held the only customer that was in the store.
There was the one young man in the hoodie that was dealing with the customer. Where did the other 2 young men go?
One of them was carrying a gun, and he pointed it right at my face. The gun was in front of my eyes in a second, and they were demanding that I give them the money. As you can see, I'm telling him, put the gun down, take anything, take everything in the store. I will give you the money. I was reaching to give him the money.
And as the two men were yelling and screaming at you, and one of them has a gun pointed at you, where's your focus? Where are you looking?
I was looking right at him, right at the gun.
At him, the guy, at the gun, or the man holding the gun?
At the man and at the gun.
What happens next?
So I was reaching and trying to give them the money so that they, leave me. And when they shifted their focus to the office, I knew that my wife had come out. And all I could think of, please stay inside. And as soon as I looked at her, they had shot her already.
Now, would you recognize the young man who was pointing the gun at you if you saw him again?
Yes,
Looking around the courtroom, do you see that young man here today?
I do.
Can you please tell the jury where he is in the courtroom and what he's wearing?
He is sitting in the front desk wearing green shirt.
Your Honor, may the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant, Jimmy Moran?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, as you testify here today, are you testifying about the events as you recall them, or are you testifying about the events having looked at the video?
I think both.
Okay.
I think having experienced what I experienced and then looking at the video, I can judge it.
Okay. And so while looking at the video, your word, judging what's happening, correct?
Reporting back.
But as the events were actually unfolding, you were living and experiencing those events, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Yes.
a yes? And the events that we're talking about here happen rapidly, correct?
Correct.
And at no time when the men were in front of you yelling and screaming and cursing, did anyone fire a single shot at you. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
And the other man that was at the back of the store, not a single shot was fired at him. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And as you ran to your wife, no one fired a shot at you.
They ran away. They ran away. After they shot my wife, they ran away.
And no one fired a shot at you at any time when you were in that store.
I'm still here.
Does that mean no one fired a shot?
No.
Now your wife is still living. She survived, correct?
She's breathing.
Okay. Now, you said that you see the man pointing the gun directly at you, right?
In my face, yes.
The gun is in your face. What do you see? The gun? Or are you looking to make an assessment of who's holding the gun?
They were both yelling at me. I had to look at them. I had to talk to them, not to the gun. So I was looking at their faces. As you can see in the video, I'm putting my hands up, telling them, please put the gun down, looking at them.
Okay. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Your Honor, the government calls as its next witness Mr. David Bradley. Mr. Bradley, do you recall where you were on the Friday night, April 4th, around 11:30 or 11:45 p.m.?
Yes, I do.
Can you tell the jury, where were you?
I was in a combination convenient store gas station.
All right. So now when you were in the convenience store looking through the aisles for stuff, anything of significance happened then?
Yes, I heard the door open. And for some reason, it just didn't feel right to me. I looked around, I saw these three guys coming in the store really quick.
And let me stop you right there. Three guys coming in. Were these young men or old men?
To me, they seemed like young guys.
And when you say young, what does that mean in terms of age? range?
To me, between 18 to 20.
And were they wearing anything of note?
Yes, they all had hoods on, hooded sweatshirts.
Hooded sweatshirts.
Mm-hmm.
Were they all of the same color?
You know, I can remember a couple of them were kind of dark.
What happens next?
I wanted to get out of the store.
And did you get out of the store?
I tried.
What happened?
One of the guys tackled me, which has never happened to me before, and I, kind of panicked.
Was it silent this whole time, or what type of
No,
sounds
it
were
wasn't.
going on?
It wasn't.
What did you hear? Do you recall?
I just heard a lot of screaming and shouting.
And as you're wrestling with one of the young men, and the other two men are dealing with the clerk and screaming and shouting, what happened next?
Somebody came out of the back room. It was a woman. And as soon as she came out, an arm went up, and then I heard a loud noise.
And when you say an arm went up, whose arm? The clerk's arm? One of the young
It
men's
was one
arm?
of the young men.
And which of the young men? The one wrestling with you, or one of the two that were facing the clerk?
No, the one wrestling with me was still wrestling with me. The shortest of the three, that arm went up.
His arm went up, and then you heard what? I'm sorry?
I heard a loud bang.
Bang like a gunshot?
I'm not sure. I'd never heard a gunshot before.
And then what happened after the loud bang?
I saw the poor woman hit the floor. And she went down. I just can't get the sound of her hitting that floor out of my head.
And after the loud bang, and after the woman hit the floor, where did the three young men in the hooded sweatshirts go?
They all took off.
And what did you do?
I ran over to see what happened, and I saw her lying on the floor, and the store clerk was quite upset. I didn't realize it was his wife, and I just saw all this blood, and I've never seen anything like that before.
And then did you call 911 or help out in any way?
Yes, I did. I had my cell phone, and the store clerk asked me to call the police, and that's what I did.
Your Honor, no further questions. Thank you.
Cross-examination.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bradley. You were in fear for your safety, correct?
Correct.
You were worried about getting home to your family, correct?
Correct.
Your heart is pumping. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
You're trying to get out of that store, right?
Right.
Who's the guy who's pushing, shoving you? What does he look like?
He was one of the tall guys, and he had a gray sweatshirt on.
What does his face look like?
I not remember his face, but I know he was a white guy.
He's a person that you never saw before in your life. Isn't
No.
that correct?
No.
That's not correct? You
No,
hadn't
I've
seen him
never
before?
seen him before in my life.
And all of these events were happening within moments of each other at a time period where you were scared to death. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
And all of a sudden you hear a shot.
Yes.
Did you look in the direction of the shot?
Yes.
You saw a lady fall to the ground. Correct?
Yes.
No further questions.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the government's case. Now, as I told you at the beginning of the case, the burden of proof is always on the government. A defendant is presumed innocent until and unless the government has established his guilt of any given charge beyond a reasonable doubt. And therefore, there's no obligation on the defendant to call any witnesses whatsoever. However, he has that opportunity, and I understand there will be one defense witness, so we'll call that witness at this time. Counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Ms. Melody Brown.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please be seated. State your full name and spell your last name.
Melody Brown, Brown.
Ms. Brown, how old are you?
18.
And tell the jury what you do.
I'm a student
Where are you a student
at high school.
at? Okay. And are you graduating this year?
I am.
All right. And back on April 4th, where were you living?
I was at home.
Okay. And who lives at your home?
My mom, my older sister, and my niece, and Jimmy,
And when you say Jimmy, who are you referring to?
my boyfriend, Jimmy Moran.
All right. And you recognize him in the courtroom?
Mm-hmm.
Where is he?
It's over there.
Your Honor, record reflect. Witness identified Jimmy Moran.
Yes.
Why is it that he was living with you at the apartment?
He was having some family problems and troubles at home, so we took him in.
Okay, and do you know what the nature of those problems were?
His dad was abusive, he was saying, and he was verbally abusive. His mom was depressed, and it was just really tough.
All right. Now, on April 4th, were you at home that evening?
Yes,
Were you at home for the entire night?
yes,
Do you love Jimmy?
yeah, I do.
And would you testify to help him? Because you love him?
Well, I don't want anything bad to happen to him, so yeah, I want to help him, but I'm not going to lie for him.
All right. You know you're 18, you're a senior in high school. You know what it means to take an oath and tell the truth.
Yes,
And your testimony to the jury is that Jimmy was home with you for the entire evening.
yes,
Never left.
no.
No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now let me take you to the night of April 4th. You say you were at home?
Yeah,
Was that a Friday night?
yes,
And you were home all night, is that right?
yes,
And you were home all night with your boyfriend who you loved, Jimmy?
yes.
And no one else was home at night with you then, right?
No, my mom went to work, and my sister was out with the baby.
So there was no one else in the home who could also say whether you were home at night with Jimmy, is that right?
Yeah.
And what were you doing with Jimmy around 11:30 p.m.?
We were just watching movies. We usually have a Friday movie night, so
Oh, what movie were we watching?
I don't remember. It was some comedy.
What did you have for dinner that night?
We got takeout.
So are you clear that on April 4th, Jimmy was with you and you were watching some comedy?
Yes,
What were you doing on Saturday, April 5th at 11:30 p.m.?
I was at home,
What were you doing there at home?
just hanging out.
Just hanging out? Were you watching movies? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
But you're very clear on what happened on Friday, April 4th at 11:30 p.m., watching a comedy, is that right?
Yes.
No further questions.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the evidence in this case. And now we will hear closing arguments of counsel. I want to remind you that nothing counsel says in argument is evidence. The evidence which has now been fully put before you came from the witnesses. However, at this point, counsel have the opportunity to suggest to you what inferences you should draw or choose not to draw, as the case may be, from the evidence that's been presented, and you may find it very helpful to your own deliberations to hear their competing views. Because the government has the burden of proof, we begin with the government. Mr. Quinn.
Thank you, Your Honor. You all may remember when we started this trial, Mr. Rico told you that this is a case about tragedy. And you've now heard the evidence, and it is a tragedy. 3 young men ran into Mr. Elz's convenience store. One of the 3 young men had a gun. He pointed it at Mr. Elz. Then he redirected it at Mr. Elz's wife as she came in from the back. And he shot her, critically wounding her. And even if there were any doubt at this point, beyond all the consistent testimony of the witnesses and beyond the surveillance video, you have a positive, 100% positive identification from the one who would know best, Mr. Elz, who was only a couple feet away, looking face to face with the defendant, Jimmy Moran, at a critical moment. And you saw him unwaveringly identify in open court, under oath, that the man who had the gun at him, the young man who had the gun pointed at him and who shot his wife, was none other than the defendant, Jimmy Moran. And although you may have heard the defense counsel try to say, oh, you were rattled, you were emotional, you were looking just at that gun. That's not what the witness said in response. No, that gun was in my face, but I was looking because I had to talk to, because I was being yelled at, because I had to deal with the men who were holding me up, the defendant. And you may hear stories about how the defendant and his friend Tommy, they've done some illegal things, they've hung out, they've done drugs, And maybe Tommy tells him what to do. Maybe Tommy tells Jimmy what to do. Maybe Jimmy follows. But at the end of the day, Jimmy had the option to follow or not follow, to go into that convenience store or not go into that convenience store, to bring the gun, not bring the gun, to shoot or not shoot. And he chose to do all those things. Now let's talk about another witness who was on that stand where there is no evidence to corroborate her and why you can't believe her. Let's talk about Melody Brown, the girlfriend who loves him. And while you can't necessarily fault her for it, you can certainly know why it is that she came here to lie for him. As she said herself, she takes him in, she has taken him in, she'll do what she has to do to protect him, and she does what she has to do to keep him out of trouble. And Jimmy, he's in trouble now. But he's in trouble because of what he did and because of his actions. In fact, there is no evidence whatsoever to corroborate the fact that he was supposedly at their home watching movies at 11:30 p.m., some comedy on a Friday night on April 4th, a very specific memory, which Melody Brown was very clear about, crystal clear, yet no recollection, very hazy. What happened the very next night? Why? Because she doesn't know. Because unfortunately, she's making it up, and it just didn't happen. And you know it didn't happen, not only because she's not telling you the truth, but because of all the other evidence that we've just discussed, placing Jimmy Moran in the convenience store with a gun pointing at Mr. Elz and then shooting Mrs. Elz. So now that we've talked about the facts and what happened, let's talk about the crimes that have been charged here. I expect that in a moment the judge is going to tell you about the law and what it is that you as the jury needs to focus on and what you need to find in order to convict the defendant of the 3 crimes charged. Let me take you through them briefly and how the facts support those charges. The first charge is armed robbery. To be guilty of armed robbery, the defendant has to have forcibly taken property, used a weapon, and done it knowingly and intentionally. You've seen all of those 3 things. You know all of those three things happen. The defendant ran in with Tommy, Quinn, and Harry with a gun. They forcibly took the property. They ran off after shooting Miss Elz, so they didn't take the money with them. But as the cashier, as Mr. Elz was handing over the money, they were taking it. They were robbing that convenience store. That's what they wanted to do. They used a weapon, clear as day. Every single witness has told you that Jimmy had a gun, a firearm. Well, you know it happened because he shot Mrs. Elz. And you know he did it knowingly, you know he did it intentionally, because they walked into that store knowing that they were going to rob the store. That was the plan. There's no dispute about that. So that's armed robbery. Let's talk about the second charge, assault in the first degree. To be guilty of assault in the first degree, there are 2 things that you need to find as a jury. The first is that the defendant committed an act that caused serious physical injury to another. And the second is that the defendant knew or had a high likelihood of knowing that his actions might cause serious physical injury. You know that's what happened because that's what the evidence shows you. You know that he committed an act that caused serious physical injury because he shot the gun. Pointing at Mr. Elz, Miss Elz comes out, turns over there, and shoots her. That's his act. That is the act that caused serious injury. And when you bring a firearm into a convenience store and you fire that firearm, you also know that that's going to cause serious injury, and that's the second element. That is why Jimmy Moran is guilty of assault with the first degree. And finally, attempted murder. To find him guilty, the defendant guilty of attempted murder, 2 things that you need to find. First, that the defendant committed acts that came dangerously close to causing another person's death. And number 2, the defendant had the conscious purpose or intent to cause that death. And again, you know because the evidence tells you that both of those things happened. The act that he committed was shooting Miss Elz with a firearm in the head as she was approaching. You know that that is going to cause death. And just luckily, although she's brain dead, she's not dead. But you know that that was his intent, and he knew that was going to happen. And he had that conscious purpose to commit that. And that is why the defendant is also guilty of attempted murder. Now, one last thing I just want to talk about is, do you definitely know, because you've heard things about how things were split second, and that the defendant fired impulsively, that it was a highly emotional frenzy, all of these phrases and words that you heard Mr. Rico use in his opening. But you'll see for the surveillance video exactly how that was. That the defendant heard Miss Elz come in, he turned, he aimed, and although there was no hesitation, he consciously pulled the trigger and shot her. In the head, not in the body, not missing her, but shifting over, shooting her in the head, right there, like somebody who's fired a gun before, like somebody who knows how to handle a gun and can fire it. And just because it happens quickly, it doesn't mean it wasn't intentional. All the time in our everyday lives, we make important conscious decisions that are fast. In this case, it was a quick decision to harm because he was scared and he needed to do something as the woman was approaching. He didn't want to be caught. But think to yourselves, all of us drive, and so have you ever seen a dog run across or a car come across, and all of a sudden you need to slam on the brakes? Instinctively, you're the driver. What do? Split second, you put your hand out to stop your passenger, your little daughter, your loving wife, your husband. Split second, because you know, protect them, thinking, intentional. It's not reflexive, you are thinking. And just as surely as when Miss Elz came out from the back, he intended to. He knew, split second, somebody's coming, I gotta get out of this robbery, I'm gonna shoot. Why else? He planned and he knew that he had to bring that firearm and in case he was gonna use it. And that's the last thing I wanna touch upon here, is you've heard all this, was there a plan to kill anybody? Was there a plan to murder anybody? That's not any of the elements that are in this case. You don't need to know, and they didn't have to have planned to kill anybody when they entered that store. The question is did Jimmy Moran intend to shoot and kill at the moment he shot and hurt Miss Elz? And you know that's what happened, and you know that's what he did. So don't believe or don't worry about the fact that they didn't plan ahead of time to shoot and harm people. In fact, most criminals, most robbers, they don't want that to happen. Of course one doesn't want that to happen. So don't be confused or dissuaded by that. So in the end, I ask you to return the only verdict consistent with the evidence in this case, which is that the defendant is guilty of armed robbery, of assault in the first degree, and of attempted murder. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Now we'll hear from counsel for the defendant.
Thank you, Your Honor. When I started in the case and I gave my opening remarks, I started by saying that I wanted to tell you about what actually happened and not theory. And what Mr. Kim did in his closing remarks was an excellent job of mixing theory with actual fact. Now, I started by saying to you all, you can't unfortunately look into the minds of witnesses. You can't look into the mind of Jimmy Moran, nor can you look into the mind of Mr. Elz, or look into the mind of young Melody Brown to determine whether or not one witness is being truthful, or look into the mind of a witness and when they're telling you they remember they saw this person. Sure, Mr. Elz was asked, did you have an opportunity to review the videotape? Are you testifying from the videotape or from what you really remember happened that night? Well, he had to candidly admit that he's testifying from a combination of both because he said to you, his word, not mine, I'm looking at it for judgment. The testimony for you to decide a case on is not based on his judgment, but on his ability to accurately recall the events that he's testifying about as they happened. Then, in this case, you have the beautiful opportunity to examine the events as he testified to and look at the videotape. And what you'll see in the videotape is that the words that he used in this courtroom are not consistent with the events as they were being recorded by that video camera. His head is down at times. He's trying to avoid direct eye contact with them. You can see that in the tape. And you can see that he only looks over to his left once, not before the shot like he wanted to tell you, but after you see the young shooter churn and spin and fire. And if you watch that videotape, that shot is happening as he turns around. It's less than 1 second. And from that less than 1 second, Mr. Quinn wants you to believe that Jimmy Moran is the male Annie Oakley, a sharpshooter of the highest order. And there's no such testimony of that. The testimony in this case by Tommy Quinn, Mr. Quinn talked about what you could believe from Tommy Quinn. This is what you could believe from Tommy Quinn. Nothing. Tommy Quinn is going to do what he has to do to stay out of the penitentiary. And if it means blaming the flunky, why, he's no threat to nobody. He's at the bottom of the food chain in their game, not the top, like him and Harry. And so as you have to review the facts in this case, and you have to decide in that 1 split second, was there an intent? If you decide it was Jimmy Moran, or whoever you decide, the shooter, in that 1 split second, it would be wonderful, again, if we could look into his mind and be able to examine what's happening so we could get a sense as to whether or not this was something done in fright or if it was something done intentionally. Go back, deliberate. Judge Rakoff is going to instruct you on the law in a few minutes. Discuss it with each other. Use your common sense. Compare the facts. Put them together with the law and do justice. In this case, you will decide at the end of the day what that is. Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Honor.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the evidence in this case. Now we really come to the most important part of the case, which is your deliberations. Now, there are 3 charges here. And as to each of these charges, the government is required to prove each essential element of that charge beyond a reasonable doubt. The first charge is a charge of armed robbery. To prove that the defendant committed armed robbery, you must find that the prosecution has proved beyond a reasonable doubt 3 essential elements. First, that the defendant forcibly took property from the possession of someone else. Second, that in the course of so doing, he used a weapon or another dangerous instrument. And third, that he did these things knowingly and intentionally, that he intended, that it was his purpose to rob the person through the use of a dangerous weapon or the like. The second charge is a charge of assault in the first degree, or what's sometimes called aggravated assault. To convict a defendant of assault in the first degree, you must find that the prosecution has proved beyond a reasonable doubt 2 essential elements. First, that the defendant committed acts that caused serious physical injury to another person. And second, that the defendant committed these acts knowing there was a high likelihood that they might cause serious physical injury. The third charge is attempted murder. To convict the defendant of attempted murder, you must find that the prosecution has proved beyond a reasonable doubt 2 essential elements. First, that the defendant committed acts that came dangerously close or very near to causing another person's death. And second, that the defendant committed those acts with a conscious purpose or intent to cause the death of that other person. But don't tell me where you stand on any issue until and unless you've reached a verdict. To reach a verdict, you must be unanimous. The verdict must reflect each individual juror's own conscientious beliefs, but it also must be unanimous of all 12 of you. So, I thank you so much for your service, and you are now excused to the jury room to begin your deliberations. Madam Foreperson, please rise. Has the jury reached a verdict?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please hand the verdict envelope to my bailiff, who will hand it to me. So, the verdict is in proper form. Madam Foreperson, please rise again. You say that on the charge of armed robbery, you find the defendant guilty. Is that correct?
Yes.
You say on the charge of aggravated assault in the first degree, you find the defendant guilty. Is that correct?
Yes.
You say that on the charge of attempted murder, you find the defendant not guilty. Is that correct?
Yes.
Please be seated. All right, counsel, we will set this down for a sentence 45 days from now. I expect this will be a full sentencing hearing, so let's make it at 10 a.m. If there are any motions between now and then, they need to be filed 10 days from now. I want to thank counsel for their excellent work on both sides, and we'll see you in 45 days.